Welcome back. We are sorry for the technical hiccup. That's part of the fun, isn't it? Now we're on Hangouts now. It's like primitive. It's like 2009 again. But we went over the Russia stuff. Pretty much what we said is Russia is going to have Ukraine back in sphere within the next 5 years. Some Ukrainian president is going to have to go grovel before Putin and shake his hand and all that fun stuff because that's just the way it works. And the West is pretty much lost in this issue, especially after they didn't get Crimea immediately, which again, I think that's with this new war. I think they're trying to bleed Russia out of Crimea so they can have that big, beautiful NATO base there and keep Russia cornered. But it's not going to work now, is it?
No, it's too far advanced. I don't think they had a contingency plan for what would happen if Russia acquired Crimea. I think they probably thought that Crimea would probably resist, that Russia wouldn't leave it up for a referendum.
Yeah.
It's several things. It was touch and go all that entire winter, what would happen. And then by March, it was basically over. And I think ever since then, also the inability of Ukraine to take over Lugansk and Donetsk, not the least of which that they managed by the end of the summer of 2014, to go basically just within a few kilometers of Mariupol, which is a Ukrainian port. So now that forces them to patrol a larger area. Sorry about that.
It's fine. Yeah, but you're telling me that you're telling me that the Ukrainian forces, in conjunction with the Wignats, the Azov battalion, they couldn't take back a city from these guerrilla fighters. Now, imagine my shock, to quote a famous philosopher.
Yeah, and remember, they don't have an air force, so yeah, they've done well.
Yeah, it's.
But Russia is fighting a fourth generational war there. They are. I'm sure that there is a kind of rotation. I mean, myself, I've spoken to Russians. I know of Russians who have gone to volunteer to fight. These are young men who have already served their time in the army and are still nonetheless going there. So, it's not quite the picture that the West paints, that Russia is forcing these men against their will with a bayonet to their back, to go fight in Ukraine.
Yeah, we all just know that Adolf Hitler, he's just the modern villain of our age. But I think we've successfully exhausted that topic over that. But let's get into our new UN ambassador. Now, back in October, UN ambassador Nikki Haley announced she'd be leaving the position by the end of the year. Now, despite rejoicing, and we all knew that her replacement was basically going to be a carbon copy, it wasn't going to be much better. Now, her proposed successor, who still has to get through a Senate confirmation, which she most likely will, is Heather Nauert, which she's not much better. Now, for those in the audience who are more keyed in, you'll recognize her on the show as the State Department spokeswoman and used to be a talking head for Fox News. Now, this comes as no surprise for me. Now, at the very least, I will say this. I think we will get I think she's at least better than Kushner or Ivanka would be, so we've dodged a bullet on that at the very least. And she is another strong woman type that the conservative ink that a lot of these people say, oh, look at the strong woman for our greatest ally in the UN. It's going to be like Nikki Haley again, except a white blonde woman. Now, I did predict this, and I still think this may pan out. I think we're seeing what I like to call a Pompeo effect. By this, I mean you'll have a neocon, you'll have someone who's hawkish, will still be in that role, but they won't openly contradict Trump and will be on somewhat of a leash. Like, for example, think about Nikki Haley would constantly contradict him, whereas Pompeo, you would get mildly positive statements about especially the North Korea situation and somewhat on Russia. Again, I don't think it's going to be fully under control, but he's found a compromise where he has a neocon that will somewhat do his bidding, but also satisfy the powers that be.
Yeah, I mean, if anything, the libs are just going to get upset that Fox News is now in the UN, and But you're right, she's not. I mean, and we weren't going to get anything really a hell of a lot better. Nikki Haley's very annoying. We'll see how she turns out. The new one turns out to be. Yeah.
Yeah, I heard a theory that basically Nero, because of her inexperience and where she comes from, is basically a smoker made because Trump detests the UN, so he figures, let's find someone, throw them in there, cause chaos. I really don't care. Now, I wouldn't be surprised, but again, America at the UN requires some neoconservatism just because of the way it's set up. But again, I still like her marginally better than Haley. Again, it's kind of like how I tolerate Bolton slightly more than I tolerated H.R. McMaster. Again, it's those slight incremental improvements. And speaking of Bolton, just as an aside, I don't think he's going to get his regime changed around by 2019, which we can at least smile and laugh about that.
Yeah, and I don't think Pompeo is going to achieve it. Thank God he won't. I mean, I hate both these guys. I suppose Trump has had to make some kind of concession to them. It's unfortunate. It's sort of like second term Bush with these characters floating around, but it's a vastly different world.
Like I think under Bush, of course, they were all for it. I think under Trump, they're more so. A mixture between appeasement to the powers that be and something of like attack dogs that you keep on chain, like, oh, you stay away from me or I'll stick my scary dogs on you. I think it's somewhat of that effect, but of course, look, unfortunately, Trump is known to ignore his advisors, so we can at least take solace in that fact.
Yeah, and I would agree. I just mean, well, long term, everybody knows it's the situation with the world and the U.S. has changed in the last 10 years. So, Pompeo and Bolton can seem like relics. I think they're basically for an American audience primarily. That's their purpose. It's the way that Trump has to appear strong.
Yeah, when you can send Bolton to quote unquote stand up to Putin, that looks good for the hawks in America and ultimately doesn't cause too much trouble.
Right. Yeah, they're basically optics for a U.S. market or for a Western market. I mean, we should think conversely. What would happen if Trump didn't get somebody like Bolton or Pompeo? He would the cries to Trump is Putin's puppet would resound at an even higher pitch than they already are now.
Yeah, I also think they were good, like good cop, bad cop kind of dynamic for North Korea. So I will give at least that. I actually expect Bolton to be out within the next few months. That's my personal prediction, but it could pan out, it could not. But I do want to move on to some stuff about Yemen. Speaking of more so Trump's foreign policy in particular, so the Sanders-Lee resolution to cease U.S. involvement in Yemen passed the Senate with a 56-54 vote. Now, you'll recall back in March, a similar proposal by, I believe it was actually Sanders and Rand Paul, which got shot down 66-33. Now, you got to remember back in March, that's when Mohammed bin Salman was going to the West, shaking hands with Trump, shaking hands with May, going and hang out in France and showing, like, look how a modern progressive Saudi leader I am. Look how amazing I am. Before he decided to liquidate, quite literally, the CIA asset back when he was the media darling, which was quite the funny time, if in retrospect.
Mm-hmm.
Now, unfortunately, despite this passing the Senate, it's more of a symbolic measure, especially because the House has not held a vote and under Ryan refused to hold a vote. Now, it probably won't enter in the law, at least for now. And there is some hope, however. Now, the silver lining of the Democrats taking back control of the House in the new year is that by sheer force alone, by their base, and by some of the actions they proposed, they may actually hold a vote on Yemen that may actually pass. Now, I'm not holding my breath. Now, many news outlets, what I found funny about this, were quick to try to paint this as a blow to Trump as if he were responsible for the U.S. intervention and ignoring that started in 2015 under Obama. And Trump will now have a reason to decrease or end U.S. involvement in Yemen while being able to shift the blame to Congress to the Saudis who are going to be angry at him. And this all comes on top of, you have to keep in mind, the U.S. trying to force a ceasefire last month and ending the refueling of Saudi aircraft in October after the Khashoggi debacle. And the UN has also brokered a ceasefire. Granted, the UN's track record, that isn't very meaningful, but at least it's something.
Yeah, I'm actually really kind of perplexed about why there's been this. I mean, I can understand with Khashoggi, but we already talked about this in the summer, that there was a slow creeping movement against Saudi Arabia with reference to its involvement in Yemen. And we already saw some mainstream media in the West, even like France 24, even some American news outlets, kind of, I mean, portraying or implying a negative aspect to Saudi Arabia's involvement in Yemen. And, you know, I mean, we both know it's not because there were protests that this happened. So something else has shifted, and this precedes what happened with Khashoggi by a few months. Again, I'm kind of perplexed. Why now? You know, the war's been going on for several years. The West didn't pay any attention to it at all. You know, you could find out information on it if you were on Twitter or Google Plus. You had all kinds of small accounts that were talking about what was happening in Yemen, or maybe you were watching.
Yeah, pretty much the only main outlet talking about it was RT, which immediately gets written off as Russian propaganda.
Yeah, exactly. So what was, you know, so what happened? Because essentially, you know, asking for peace in Yemen is empowering Iran. And it is a strategic area in terms of shipping lanes, you know, water-based shipping lanes. So I don't totally know, and I don't know if that is somehow connected with Qatar as well. The other country involved in Yemen is also the United Arab Emirates, and they've forged a very strong relationship. I mean, it always has been strong. Some of these families are related, but in 2016, that relationship became even stronger. So
yeah, we'll actually get into that.
Yeah.
I want to talk about Qatar a little bit later, but yeah, so you can sit on that. But if I describe my thoughts on Yemen right now, it's a cautious optimism.
Yeah.
Now, in terms, go on.
No, go on. No, I'm just agreeing. Yeah.
I was just going to say, in terms of cautious optimism, to continue that line, the United States has picked up again its negotiations with the Taliban in Afghanistan. Now, over the past year and a half, especially since the summer, the U.S. has really been in intermittent peace talks with the Taliban. They've been on and off. Sometimes they pick up. Sometimes they look really optimistic. Sometimes they get thrown completely out the window. And it seems like the U.S. is trying to negotiate a withdrawal from Afghanistan finally. Now, various leaks over the past couple of years, ranging from reasonable to ridiculous, depending on who you believe about these leaks and the credibility of them, all that aside the point. These seem to point to the sign that Trump wants out of Afghanistan, but is being steered away by people like Mattis, again, back then H.R. McMaster, Tillerson when he was Secretary of State. So it seems like Trump wants out, but there's elements in there keeping him in. So, again, depending on how much you believe those leaks. Now, the U.S. over the past 17 years has had a very inconsistent relationship with the Taliban. From overthrowing their government to an insurgency war with them, to ceasefires, to temporary alliances to fight groups like ISIS and even Al-Qaeda in the latter day. So negotiations between the U.S. and the Taliban are really nothing new. Now, at this point, on December 14, 2018, about half of Afghanistan is under Taliban rule, and I believe they're actually more popular than the sitting government at the moment. And the political wing of the Taliban, I can't remember what their party is called, but I know they have a political wing like many of these groups in that region, has seen a great deal of success in recent local elections. Now, at the U.S., you know, I know this is a bit of a long shot and kind of looking way too far than we actually have an accurate gauge to predict. The U.S. can successfully negotiate a peace deal and withdraw. I mean, we got to ask the question, will China try their hand at taming Afghanistan, or will they learn from the failure of others? Now, I know that's like a lot of what ifs, but again, is quite interesting because it seems like these talks are really picking up now. Whenever these talks pick up, it seems like the Taliban always decides to suicide bomb some embassy or hit some U.S. military camp. Very false flags kind of stuff always happen when these talks look optimistic.
Yeah, that is true. The timing is really quite something. But there was a time where the Taliban, I mean, everybody knows now, where they were in control, and of course, opium poppies weren't growing, and it's also a place with very rich deposits, mineral deposits, used for computer manufacturing. So, I don't know what kind of deal has been struck. If America, I mean, it's huge. America leaving Afghanistan is enormous.
Even the possibility.
It's a possibility. Yeah. I mean,
yeah, theoretically, even the possibility is amazing. Like even the fact that these talks have been this successful the past couple of weeks, it's amazing.
Yeah, is it just not worth it, or is some kind of a deal has been struck, say with? I'm presuming Iran, Pakistan, Russia, China, and America are going to be the big players there, who are deciding what happens next. Russia, for a while, was even helping America in Afghanistan. As far as I know, that's still the case. What has happened? I think in the next few years, we're probably going to find out. It remains to be seen. I guess the Taliban isn't going to go away. You could look at it as a kind of an example of a culture that just will not accept change and invasion.
Yeah, I mean, yet again, the end of history is proven to be completely wrong. Like, not even just wrong, but completely the opposite is true. I mean, look, I'm not condoning the Taliban or anything, but I'm saying, whether it was the Soviet-backed communist government or the monarchy before that, a country like Afghanistan with all these tribal factions, they need a ham-fisted leader to keep that country in line and to make it into a semi-functional society. And even then, it's still pretty dysfunctional. But they need somebody like the Taliban, like the communist regime, like the monarchy before that, to keep Afghanistan in line.
Yeah. All the efforts, to bring liberal democracy to Afghanistan, they're really quite funny. Where I live, I would leave work and I would have these young women petitioning me with flyers about Afghanistan and the life of girls there and what we can do. I mean, obviously some kind of a Soros front, but you don't see them much anymore. So things are changing.
Yeah, it's actually kind of funny. Like, we could do an entire stream on this in and of itself. The shift of the liberals and the left over the past 10 years about, they're still internationalists. They still have that streak, but how their internationalism has changed. Like, oh, we have to free the poor, oppressed women, as to like, oh, we need to welcome the Muslims. But again, that is all aside the point. But in terms of Afghanistan, I think it's amazing that the negotiations have been lasting this long, like over the past 6 months, and have had some level of consistency. And like I said, I think there's probably going to be some kind of false flag event. I mean, and again, you look at it, it could be a false flag event that complete backfires. If we have some major attack on a U.S. installment in Afghanistan, that might be the American people saying, why are we there after 17 years? Why are we getting our boys killed over there? Bring them home. I really don't care anymore. So it could have like the exact opposite effect if they tried something like that.
What if the Taliban? What if the whole situation in Afghanistan is also tied in with Saudi Arabia? I mean, we would presume that Saudi Arabia is probably the biggest funder for the Taliban within Afghanistan. And what if America's shift on Saudi Arabia in Yemen has to deal with where things are going in Afghanistan?
Not bad. That didn't cross my mind. See, that's why I keep you around. That's why I don't do the show solo. But I did want to get into a bit of European news because there's an entire slew of it. Now, last week we talked about the yellow vest protest in France, the reverse Maidan, as I called it. Now, last Now, last Saturday there were more intense protests in France, even outdoing the ones from week prior. And they're expected to pick up again this weekend, so tomorrow, December 15th. And negotiations were called off by the Yellow Vests last week with the government, which led to the chaos last week, which I believe 1,300 people got arrested. And again, imagine if Orban did this. Imagine this happened in Poland or Russia or any country that is outside of the neoliberal world order. I mean, even China, they might say something at that point. or some of the East Asian countries, which they usually keep criticism away for various reasons. But Macron, in his infinite wisdom, has continued to berate the protesters while offering them marginal concessions, usually in the form of slight tax cuts. Now, unfortunately, Macron survived his vote of no confidence yesterday while his nation burned down. So Macron, it looks like he's here to stay, at least for now.
Yeah, I mean, I think they're circling the wagons. I think France is very afraid of where things are going to go. I believe one of their defense minister about a week or two ago resigned and wrote a letter to Macron indicating that he thought the possibility of a civil war occurring within France in the next 5 to 10 years was of a very high possibility. And then you have the military staff of the French military today saying, for instance, that France signing on to the UN Migration Pact is a form of treason.
Yeah, I mean,
so I think Macron, I think even the opposing parties, I think they're afraid, and regardless of what political affiliation, they're not prepared for this. I don't think any side, like any representative in French government, is in any way strongly tied in with this, and I think that's why he survived the vote of no confidence. Because I really don't think they have a plan about what to do if this continues.
I mean, you also look at it. Remember how many cops would actually just completely leave their posts and join the protesters? Imagine if they called the army out or the military out or declare martial law. How many soldiers do you think are going to do the same?
I know.
Yeah, but on top of this, France was also struck with one of the deadliest terrorist attacks since the spike in 2015, 2016 during the migrant crisis. Now, Macron also, in his slimy ways, tried to use this to call on the protesters to stand down. Now, this will likely accomplish the opposite. I mean, I can imagine on what are expected to be tomorrow's demonstrations that a lot of resentment for terrorist attacks, especially this most recent one, are going to get brought up. Now, in terms of the Yellow Vest, the Yellow Vest Revolution, as it's been dubbed, is also consuming Europe. You're seeing it happen in several other countries, specifically Belgium, the Netherlands, Germany, and now more recently Sweden. Now, these haven't been all-out street wars like they've been in France, but they've still been large numbers and a lot of people in the EU calling for change. And again, this is no surprise considering the fact the nature of the EU and some of the predictions we've even made on this show about the crumbling of the current world order and how Europe, it's probably balkanizing, at least as a political union.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, the cracks, if we look at the state of the EU, say from 2014 till now, the cracks are only getting bigger. You know, the long distance view back, I remember when Maidan was happening, I just thought, like, why do you want to join the EU? It's going to be in major trouble with reference to Ukraine. And you look at it now, and it's of a totally different magnitude in terms of what kind of trouble they've gotten themselves into. Also, countries like Hungary are still resisting very well. Who would have thought in 2016 or 17 that was going to be possible?
Oh, yeah. I mean, you know what's actually really interesting if you were talking about zooming out to 2013, 2014. You look at where this started. This started in Greece pretty much because the EU pillaged their economy. And I mean, not to get too LARPy here, but you think about it, Western civilization starts in Greece, and now the breakdown of the EU also started in Greece. So I don't know. I find it a bit poetic. Now, I'm not saying like it's a complete parallel, but I think it's a bit interesting.
Yeah, and there were a lot of dirty things that went on with Greece as well. There were two gold mines that the Greeks wanted to open up in order to help pay for the debt, and I can't remember which company. It might have been a Canadian or American company refused to do that. So there's all this kind of political squeezing going on that doesn't totally reflect how economies work. But you're right. It began with this kind of intensity began with Greece around 2013.
Yeah, I mean,
2014.
Pretty much, Southern and Eastern Europe said, "Oh, they're going to do that to a poorer nation." I'm not saying like these nations are third world by any means, but if they're willing to do that to a nation under constraints, what are they going to do to us? Now, just to move on about EU talks, let's get into just probably the most hilarious part of all this. Brexit is still under negotiation for some reason. Now, as we discussed last week, there's nobody who was happy with the recent Brexit proposal, whether they're Labour, Lib Dem, Tory, Remainer, Brexiteer, any political affiliation, pretty much everyone hates this plan. Now, this prompted marches all over the country last Sunday, which managed to avoid violence for the most part. And I was talking to actually a couple British people, and they were saying, "Oh yeah, I'm probably gonna avoid this because it's probably gonna break out into fights. They'll probably have provocateurs planted all over these things," and which I don't blame them for that line of thought. But ultimately, they managed to avoid violence. Of course, you had the Antifa, the Black Bloc, show up in small numbers, but they didn't cause too much of a riot. Again, it wasn't France, if you know what I'm saying. Now,
yeah,
Theresa May also managed to barely escape the wrath of the Conservative Party by pledging to step down by 2022 or sooner. My money is probably on sooner than later. Now, this also comes about 2 months after Merkel said she wouldn't seek re-election in 2021. Now, my prediction for this, I expect May's government to completely crumble before 2022, probably within the next 2 years, probably 2019 or 2020 when the Brexit stuff really picks up. Now, this would probably force an election. I wouldn't be surprised. Now, what would happen in this election? I think Labour would win, which would make Jeremy Nosbel Corbyn the next Prime Minister of the
UK. We're winning.
I mean, I would say the Nosbels, they've had a pretty good track record as of recently.
It's because of our union with the Irony Bros. And
of course. How can I overlook that? Here I am.
I think May is. I can't help but think that May wanted this to fail.
Oh, I absolutely believe that. I mean, she campaigned to remain in the union. David Cameron, her predecessor, for all his faults, at least he had the integrity to say, "I don't believe in this, and I don't trust myself to lead the country out of this. So here, you do it." So I can respect him at least on that. But Theresa May went in to sabotage this, and she accomplished her goal.
Yeah. Now they're supposed to have another meeting January 21st, I believe. So, I mean, I think they're just going to keep kicking this can down the road, and until the people are just exhausted. The EU has a record of doing this, where it's not the vote that they wanted, and when they've exhausted and made the people feel impotent and politically incapable of changing anything, then they have another vote. It's a slow grind. Although I don't see with the way things are heating up in France and then spreading all throughout Europe right now, how they can afford to keep playing this game. I think it's gotten very serious. I think this is a very different world than it was 3-4 years ago. And it's going to be even more different in a year or two.
Oh, yeah. I mean, especially with France deciding to completely burn down their country, the fact that you had some peaceful marches in the UK was pretty surreal. And I don't know how much they numbered in, but I just know that pretty much everyone across the political spectrum is pissed off with May. And, frankly, I don't blame them. But, yeah, I've been saying this for a few months now. The European Union is going to dissolve before the time they negotiate a deal with the British.
Yeah. My problem is I just don't trust any of them. I don't think the Britain's political class wants this.
Oh, absolutely not.
Yeah, so I don't know what to say except just there's a mistrust for my part.
But just on more European news, I did get into a bit of a, I wouldn't say spat on Twitter, but I did have a bit of disagreement, not directly, but I've been seeing a lot of people, especially in light of Salvini's recent trip to Israel and his comments on Israel in the EU. Now, he did the whole pro-Zionist routine that a lot of these leaders have to do, and he's not the first populist bloc leader to do this. You recall Kurz, who's the Chancellor of Austria, has done this. And of course, Orban, the Prime Minister of Hungary, has done this. Now, this doesn't sit well with many, including myself, but there's no reason to really blackpill on this and think it's the end of the world, think that they're all just shills for them. Because we have to remember that Israel is not the massive liability on these European countries as it is on the U.S. You don't see them selling all these Italian state secrets to China. You don't see them stealing their technology. You don't see them with two massive espionage programs in these countries. So you have to keep that in mind, that the U.S.-Israeli relationship, the absolute liability they are on us. To more of these European countries, it's again, it's just another country. I don't like everything they do, but they're not directly this much of a drain on this. For most of them, I'll get into that point a little bit later. Now, you do also have to consider, this is great for immigration rhetoric. You take the, well, if Israel can do it, why can't we kind of line. It's surprisingly effective with a lot of Western conservatives, believe it or not.
Mm-hmm.
Now, keep in mind, again, at the end of the day, this is all a floor show, and this floor show isn't everything. Because one thing you have to consider, Theresa May hasn't done the whole jig for the powers that be in this case. She hasn't visited Israel or, gone to the holy sites and really kissed the ring, if you will. But she's one of the most Zionistic world leaders policy-wise. You look at her stance on the Syria issue. She was very quick to join in on the strikes this last time around. Maybe not so much on the Iran issue, but again, she has a very Zionistic track record in terms of her foreign policy. And, so again, at the floor show, it's actions versus words. You can say all you want. Kind of how I feel with Trump. Trump will go over there and do what he wants, but at the end of the day, he still presented at least a slight amount of pushback, and enough pushback to seem significant. Now, all this being said, I have zero trust for Benjamin Netanyahu. I doubt anyone in this audience or you yourself do. And I also have zero trust for the Israeli state. Now, we have to consider, in terms of the anti-migration rhetoric, they've previously pawned off migrants who arrived in Israel and negotiated with the UN to send them westward. We also have to consider that they would go through regime change in Syria tomorrow, given the opportunity, which would lead to another migrant crisis. While I'm not too torn up about this, I am slightly annoyed.
Yeah, and I guess we shouldn't forget that in 2018, a lot of this camaraderie with Israel and Israel also commiserating with Orban, for instance, about its wall and so on. A lot of this is odious. I mean, it's obvious just how much power and control these people have. And a lot of this is odious, and I think even they understand that it's odious. They're a ruling elite. They've become Europe's sort of unofficial royalty, and Salvini and others they have to play the game. But I think even Israel understands that attitudes towards Israel have changed, and they've permanently changed, and it's going in a certain direction.
Just as a bit like of an anecdote, in the lead up to the Syria strikes, I remember seeing like a lot of civnets, a lot of people who were usually singing the praises of Israel, talking about, oh yeah, we can't let them start another war that we have to bail them out of. I was shocked by seeing that. Like, I remember it was the first day the, quote unquote chemical attack happened. They're saying we can't intervene in Syria no matter how much Israel asks us to. So yeah, that was actually a bit surreal considering the fact you see these elements that are usually very pro-Zionist coming out against them. But yeah, like I agree with you. They know the attitudes have changed. And like I said, it's the action to have Salvini or Orban go over there and do the little dance. But people like May and Macron actually doing strike, I think it paints a bit of a different picture. Who do you think is really more beholden than in that case?
Right. I mean, at the end of the day, they're still these European countries are still asserting their sovereignty and a sovereignty under a more nationalistic ideology. That was, foreboding about 4 years ago. And the fact that an Israeli prime minister would encourage them is also something that wouldn't have happened 4 years ago. So I do tend to look at this, that there is an odious aspect to it. It's kind of like the world, it's odious because there's a kind of, something has slipped, it's already changing, and some people aren't going to realize that. So, these meetings are and these gestures are odious because it has changed. So they ring hollow. Is what I'm saying, because it's no longer that world it was 5 years ago.
Yeah, I definitely agree, and it's annoying but not concerning, kind of how I feel when it comes to Trump and this kind of stuff. But let's get into a topic that's probably very near and dear to you. I believe there's a color revolution brewing in Serbia right now. Now, the last demonstrations started against Vic. Perhaps you can against this autocratic rule. Also, after the assault of a left-wing party leader. Now, this goes to the president doing a 180 and saying, "Oh, maybe Serbia should consider EU membership." Now, needless to say, the protests were genuine and slightest. They coup in 3 years. It's also a bit suspicious. Demonstrations were started against a pretty ceremonial role and little actual political power, and also all of a sudden happens on the same day France decides to stand up to the neoliberal establishment. So again, it's a bit odd, if you ask me. Now, the prime minister, keep in mind, who really holds the power is Anna Brnabić. Again, you'll probably be able to pronounce that better than I can.
Yeah,
who is, keep in mind, a childless lesbian, ethnic Croat, and I doubt she's the future of the me. Yeah, so an interesting development in Serbia. Now, I want to ask you. I know, of course, as I've been hammering on that couple minutes. Do you think there'll be a counter revolution? What?
I think there will be a resistance.
You still there?
Yeah, I'm still here. You were cutting out quite a bit, but I think I understood the gist of what you were saying.
Yeah,
I think there definitely will be a counter protest to this in Serbia. Serbia is very resilient, and also today there was a vote in Kosovo for Kosovo to form its own army. So besides the 3 other NATO countries, including America, that are already in Kosovo, there now has to be a Kosovo army. Of course, Serbs won't join this army. So tensions are brewing there. I would say maybe, there's maybe manipulations at both a possible war and in tandem, sort of like on a horizontal plane, pushing the EU within Serbia. So that if you falter in one, it's going to impede the other interest. It's a very strong tactic. I don't know what kind of aid Russia could give Serbia in this situation. I mean, it's not very good. Montenegro, as you know, has split. Macedonia is, it's basically over. They're, apparently going to join the EU by 2020. They may even join NATO sooner. So there's a kind of a whittling away of all these smaller states that historically have very strong ties with Russia, that go back for well over 500 years. And I mean direct ties. Even the way the Russian language is spoken is directly because of Bulgarian monks and scholars who after the fall of Constantinople, went to Moscow, and were shocked how much they had drifted from what we call Old Church Slavonic, and the formation of the Russian language is this tension. So it's, I mean, if you don't come from there, maybe this is, most people are unaware, but this kind of NATO American subjugation of Orthodox Slavs in the Balkans is there to emotionally wear down the Russians. I guess one could argue that not to be too conspiratorial, but maybe they'll want them leaving the Cyrillic alphabet. All these things have factors. This is a kind of technology that's used to sway populations, and if they see that these smaller states that Russia is unable to protect them against NATO, then that has a negative impact.
Yeah. What's funny about all this, like you said, it's mainly a symbolic thing, probably to demoralize the Russians, considering the fact that, again, maybe I'm wrong, but it doesn't seem like there's much strategic value to incorporating Serbia into the European empire, if you will. But I think it's a bit funny that they're still continuing like it's 2013, 2014, when you have countries like France burning down, the UK trying to leave at least, the rise of countries like Italy and Poland and Hungary in this. So I think it's a bit weird that they're still trying to grift the Balkans in when they have so many problems with the states that are already in there. And again, so I suppose that is a bit less blackpilling, considering the fact that once they join, the Union's probably going to be dead anyway. But yeah, I definitely think it's probably symbolic to try to just grind at the Russians.
Yeah, I mean, Serbia, Macedonia's, their state isn't going to improve very much. In fact, it'll be to their detriment. Minorities like Albanians will be empowered, and not the majority population. That's the point, right? It's that's already happened in Macedonia. But I agree with you. It's not so blackpilling when you consider the state that the EU is in right now. It eerily feels like this should have been accomplished around the time of Maidan in Ukraine. But the fact that they're like 5 years apart, right, is really quite startling.
Yeah, and you also have to consider, remember, I think you were still with me on the show. Remember the counter-revolution that they basically had in Moldova after they tried to really push all this on them? A lot of local elections swept the opposition party and said, no EU, no Western involvement. So yeah, you're seeing a little bit of pushback, and I think Macedonia, unfortunately, probably is done for, at least for the time being. But I think the Serbs probably have that fight left in them, and I also think it's interesting considering the fact, we've discussed before the Yugoslav wars and the tensions between the two. Seems like Croatia and Slovenia have also resisted. So I'm wondering, if this, I don't know. I'm taking a shot in the dark here. I wonder if this will kind of recreate a bond between these Balkan states that have kind of resisted this.
I personally don't think Yugoslavia will never rejoin again. It will never happen again.
Oh, I'm not suggesting that, but I'm saying maybe some kind of camaraderie, some kind of amicable relations between these independent states.
Oh, that is actually happening. There is a union of Serbians and Croatians that have formed to bring about awareness of gay agenda and those sorts of things in Croatia and Serbia respectively. That is happening. And, there is pushback, say, even in Romania against this kind of stuff. So I think they're finding out ways to incubate within this larger system to kind of, I was watching a video with Dugin, and he said something really interesting. He said, a people, a nation, what happens if they become a diaspora? And he said, and what happens if they don't? You can have a nation who has no sovereignty but has an identity. And conversely, you can have sovereignty and no identity.
Yeah, I think that's really a good example. I mean, not to disparage your homeland, but Canada, again, they've pretty much become how did Trudeau put it? The first post-national state.
Yeah. It's literally a sovereign country with no identity. Literally.
Yeah. And then you have, these groups like Poland's a good example, who lived under German and Russian rule for centuries. There was still a Polish nation. They just couldn't govern themselves. And, as much as I've expressed my opinions on the Kurds are a very strong nation despite them not having sovereignty.
That's right. So I guess they'll find a way to weather this whole thing. So
yeah, but
I hope.
I figure we should move on to pick up on the news about Qatar we covered last week. Now, Thomas Wichter is rolling over in his Twitter grave right now because Qatar's recent moves at the GCC, the Gulf Cooperation Council, have thrown it completely into disarray. Now, as you'll recall, last week, Qatar announced that they would be leaving OPEC effective January 1st, 2019, which pretty much, even though Qatar, like we said, is more of a natural gas power than oil power, has thrown the OPEC into chaos.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And we were surmising that there's a possibility. The reason that they have left is that as the war in Syria is winding down, contracts for pipes and where they're going to go are sort of being ironed out, and that new negotiations are probably taking place between Qatar and Iran, whose gas fields and submerged gas fields are one next to the other. Also, Qatar only recently became like the world's greatest gas exporter. It's only been in like the last 5 years. I forget the name of their leader, but he took a chance on drilling there, and it's transformed the country. Huge. Per capita, they're much wealthier than Saudi Arabia, and I think Saudi Arabia, along with the United Arab Emirates, is strongly opposed to Qatar, even though Qatar just 2.5 years ago was within that Saudi bosom, funding the same terrorist groups in Syria and Iraq. But something fundamental has changed, and it's definitely connected with what is happening in Yemen.
Oh, absolutely. And it's interesting because following the suit of Qatar, not necessarily leaving OPEC, but just their shift in the alliances and the arrangement of the order in that region, Kuwait and Oman have also begun to follow suit and are viewing the Saudi-United Arab Emirates alliance as more of a threat than they view the Iranians. Whereas 2 years ago, you go to these countries like Egypt, basically all the GCC countries, they would agree Iran is the primary threat and we must act to counteract them. You go a year after that, 2017, Qatar starting the war up to the Iranians. You're in present day, December 14th, 2018, you have Kuwait and Oman saying, yeah, I think we're starting to prefer the Iranians over whatever's going on in Saudi Arabia. So it's been interesting how these things are shifting.
Yeah, and I think they're directly related with the war in Syria and the war in Yemen. I think by now, like alternate ending, Yemen should have been conquered 2 years ago, and so should have Syria. And it didn't happen.
Oh, absolutely. And it was just very simple errors that kept these things from happening. And, I will say about Oman, it's interesting because they've always been like the quote-unquote neutral partner who's facilitated talks between Iran and Saudi Arabia and other countries in the region. But now they're starting to shift more solidly towards the Iranians. So, I think it's interesting how things are shifting and how pretty much, I know I hammer on this, but the Arab NATO just keeps on falling apart more and more every day, and how Trump is pretty much completely backed off on the issue, barring a few times he has to talk to the quote-unquote overlords.
Yeah. Even America's stance on Yemen, in a way, as we mentioned earlier, is beneficial for Iran. America is sort of caught in a position where it has to please and displease several opposing factions at the same time, and have like a very sort of contradictory approach. Iran must be contained. We need to overthrow their government. Oh yeah, and by the way, Saudi Arabia is completely wrong about Yemen. There's something schizophrenic about that. But again, I think these things in about 2 years are going to clarify themselves. We're going to see why that was the case.
Oh, it's been honestly absolutely surreal, and frankly, I'm not surprised, and I think in terms of the world order, nobody should really be surprised at this point. And it's funny because you were blackpilling. You actually had me blackpilling a little bit about November coming around, the sanctions. I remember Trump announced the sanctions. Then nobody has said anything about them since. It's been over a month, and pretty much.
I know. This was the big thing back in September and August. The Straits of Hormuz, and ships were going to be blocked, and I don't know what's going on with the sanctions. Like, of course, Iran has had sanctions for decades, but these were supposed to really cripple it, and it is. I don't see the kind of effect that I was thinking it would have on Iran.
Yeah, and it's funny because the reports we read back in the summer says the Iranians said they haven't seen a U.S. carrier group in the Gulf since what was it, March of 2018, and I still haven't heard any reports about them saying, "Oh yeah, we've seen carriers in the Gulf." I don't think they've reported that, so a bit white pilling there. And again, the Iranian issue kind of fell off the radar for absolutely everyone, considering the fact Saudi Arabia decided to do the worst thing at the worst time possible. But beyond all that, let's move on to our good friends in China and the second scramble for Africa, as I have dubbed this. Now, Trump announced on, I believe it was Monday, that the U.S. would begin to counter Chinese and Russian influence in Africa. Now, China, I can understand. They're actually doing stuff there. But Russia's influence outside of the former Soviet Union in the Middle East is pretty negligible. Now, this feels like something he had to tack on so DC should go along. I can just imagine Trump saying, we got to stand up to the Chinese. Look at what they're doing in Africa. And then people in DC are saying, they're like, oh, okay, whatever. And then he says, oh, yeah, Russia's doing it too. And they gradually lean in and say, what did you say about the Russians? They're doing it too. We can confront the Russians somewhere. That's how I imagine it probably went down.
Yeah, I don't think it's a good policy for America to waste its time in Africa.
Yeah, I agree, but I'll get in that a bit more. But,
yeah, go ahead.
Like I said, mainly the focus will be on China, as it should be now. This shows the new dynamic of the world and is most likely a contest for resources, more so that China needs than us. Now, while I agree on countering China, especially in Asia, like in the place we have interests, for example, the Asia Pacific, where we actually have trade routes and allies that are valuable who actually do stuff for us, I fear that the U.S., if we pursue this policy, will become too interventionist and drain ourselves in further propping up these failed African states. So I fear this policy. I can understand wanting to stop China, but again, I think involving yourself in Africa is pretty much a self-defeating policy that we don't really need to stop anyone from doing. I think the Chinese would probably shoot themselves in the foot if they do this. And I think we're also just shooting ourselves in the foot if we're going to try to stop the Chinese from doing this.
Yeah, I mean, America already has several dozen bases, like 3-4 dozen bases in Africa. China has one, and Russia has none. This is. I was listening to Pompeo. I mean, it's so explosive. It's so dramatic. They're moving in on Africa. It's like, look, they're giving them infrastructure projects at a better price. And, I hate to joke around, but, I mean, is he afraid that, maybe helping out Africa means a less diverse Europe? Like, what's the point? Wrapping up the war in Syria also means, less diverse Europe as well. These are idiotic moves. It's a waste of time. I mean, America already has the greatest amount of holdings and influence in Africa as it is. Why not hold those and focus elsewhere? I mean, Mearsheimer gave a speech last year, and I have to agree with him that America's interests should be in the Middle East, definitely the Pacific, and Europe, but that Africa would would be too much, and it wouldn't help America in the long run.
Yeah, and it's actually interesting that you said that. Pretty much, the Pacific, Europe, and the Middle East, and that pretty much just refers to all the places there's global trade routes. So, like, not even like the Levant, like Israel, Syria, stuff like that. We're talking like Gulf stuff. Ultimately, I agree, but at the end of the day, again, while I agree, China should be kept in check, especially in the Pacific. I think confronting them in Africa is just a dumb move. And again, China, they're going to shoot themselves in the foot with this, as every European power that tried to colonize Africa, at the end of the day, was just ended up being net negative for them. Look at what happened to the British Empire. Look at what happened to the French Empire. Look at what happened to the Italian holdings in Libya. Look at what happened to, just name various things. Look at the Congo under Belgium. It didn't end well for them. So again, if you want to destroy your empire, try to encroach into Africa. So if we really want to destroy China, let them destroy themselves in Africa. That's my take on it.
Yeah, and China may take some of the lessons. We also shouldn't forget that China is part of this very sort of, Oriental, to use an antiquated term, culture. In that, if you go from Morocco literally to China, and what you have is the understanding that the son, once he is married, is going to contribute financially, both to his wife's family and the family of his birth. And that's not a tradition in the West, and not even really that much in Eastern Europe. So a lot of these guys that go off to Africa and so on, the Chinese government is very well aware that money is going to be brought back in, and the society will not accept them, especially if they have biracial children, and they're stuck in this position. I don't have a crystal ball to tell you how far China is going to, what kind of a footprint they're going to leave in Africa. One doesn't know. Will it be at one base or two, or will it increase? I don't know, but. Yeah, I would agree with you. I think long term, really, what should be happening is like some kind of projects for Africans to be self-sufficient. I mean, honestly, it's tragic that they killed Gaddafi and destroyed Libya, because that could have been a model.
Yeah. I will say this in terms of like the Chinese influence, like, you have the right idea, but you're doing it all wrong. Why aren't you addressing what's happening in Canada, our northern neighbor? Why aren't you addressing what's happening in our own political system, especially in California? Remember Dianne Feinstein with her nice little driver there, Chinese spy for 20 years. Why aren't we addressing it in allies like Australia? Why aren't we addressing it on the Korean Peninsula and somewhat encroaching in Japan and the Philippines? Why don't we address it in countries that are actually allies, that have actually had our backs, have actually contributed something to American interests? Yeah, not just the interests of the American elites, but to the American people. Why aren't we addressing it there, and why are we wasting our time in Africa? That's probably my biggest issue with it.
Yeah, that's a very good point. America's alienating itself by doing this, right?
Imagine how well this program would go if we went to the Canadian, especially more the Canadian conservatives, and said, oh yeah, we're going to help you push back against all the Chinese business and the Chinese ruining real estate market. If we did similar things in Australia, that would go over well in all three of those countries. But no, we have to mess around in South Africa or Mozambique or Mali or whatever country, because of resource X, Y, or Z we could very easily get from either our homeland or Latin America, which, again, I'm all in favor of Monroe Doctrine. America should have domination over the entire Western Hemisphere. You can fight me on that, but again, we could very easily get those from our southern neighbors, but we're going halfway across the world just for a measuring contest with the Chinese.
Yeah, and in a way, it shows a tremendous amount, a kind of a lack of confidence as well. And what I mean is, you're going to far off areas, like you say, that logistically don't make sense, when you can when you could form stronger relationships and get those same materials closer at home. It's almost like saying, well, it can't be done any other way. We can't form, like, we can't excel by having a more rational approach. We literally have to circumvent the entire globe and wear ourselves thin. I mean, let's not forget that one of the reasons there's a perception of a decrease in American power is specifically because of overextenuation.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, we are so overstretched. You look at one of those maps of U.S. military bases around the world. It's pathetic. Think we can have like a consolidated effort against an actual sovereign state if we ever, unfortunately, did have to go to war. For example, if the North Korea situation would have had the much worse outcome it very possibly could have. Do you think we really could have mustered a force with troops all the way halfway across the world? I mean, because how many troops we have in South Korea? 30,000. Do you think that's enough to repel a North Korean invasion if that situation were ever to come to fruition? Yeah, and as the chat points out, a lot of Africans' problems would be solved if we just cut off foreign aid and actually made them fend for themselves. They might actually develop something sustainable.
Right, or at least give them a blueprint, some kind of minimum management about how to go about it, about how to industrialize, but not in terms of like the British moving in, because eventually, if you don't overcome them, they'll overcome you.
Yeah, but I think we've pretty much exhausted the topics. It's been a very interesting show despite the technical hiccups. We actually had a very good run on Hangouts, surprisingly enough. But yes, a very rich show. Who knows what next week will hold? And I will keep you guys posted on what we're doing over the next coming weeks, because I know the holidays are coming up, Christmas, New Year's, not exactly ideal times for shows. So we may or may not have them. We may have them on different schedules. But either way, I'll keep you guys posted. See you guys next time. Thank you for tuning in, and goodbye.